Okay, so my name's Lana. I'm a year 2 of 4 ND student, and I recently attended the TBM conference, Module 1. They have a kind of a five-part series, and it was just here in Portland, out by the airport. So TBM stands for Total Body Modification, and it uses muscle testing in conjunction with specific body points that correspond to organs to assess the organ function and metabolic function. If you aren't familiar with muscle testing, don't worry, just kind of hold on to that idea, and I am going to come back and explain more about what it is and how it works. But there's a good analogy that they used at the beginning of the TBM conference. So if you imagine that your body's like a house with a bunch of electrical wiring, whether you want to call that your meridians and chi, or however you think of that, you have a bunch of electrical wiring. And you have a fuse box or a circuit breaker. And if you like plug in all your hair dryers at the same time, you'll blow the fuse and the power will go out and you have to go flip the switch, get the power back on. It's the same with each kind of circuit that goes to an organ. And if we overtax that organ, then our body can flip that circuit off and decrease the function of the organ in order to preserve its anatomy. If we were to try and keep up with all the ways we overtax an organ, that organ would eventually be destroyed. So really it's a protective mechanism, but if it's chronically shut off, then we're not getting function, and that can interfere with our vitality and cause disease. So TBM allows us a way to kind of assess whether the fuse is on or off for each organ system, and then to go back through and flip the switch back on if it's been flipped off. And then the way that you would turn that back on is using a physical medicine adjustment. You can either use like a chiropractic adjustment or just a very gentle massage along different levels of the spine, massaging the nerve roots, and the levels depend on what organ you're adjusting. So it's really non-invasive. You don't need any special tools. You can just use your hand. They do have a special CAT, chiropractic adjusting tool, that you can use if you want to look fancier, but you don't even need that. And then once you go through and turn back on the organ, you could reassess its function and it should be improved. There is not only the physiologic organ points, but in Module 2, we learn some emotional points, mental function, learning, immune function, allergies. So you can really assess kind of all aspects of the person. And then they also go through, as part of the TBM Module 1, you learn about their autonomic recovery protocol and kind of diet and lifestyle recommendations. Because if these switches have been flipped off, you want to figure out why they're flipped off and remove the offending cause, because you going through and flipping them back on isn't going to do anything if the offending cause is still there. So a little bit more about muscle testing. I have a couple pictures as examples. If any of you are familiar with applied kinesiology, TBM actually grew out of applied kinesiology in the 1970s. So it's the same principle, but you find any strong muscle in the body, and a lot of times you use the patient's arm if they're seated because it's easy to access. And they will hold their arm out and you're just pressing down. Not real hard, it's not like a show of brute force. You're just feeling to see if the muscle fires immediately and really locks in, or whether there's kind of a wobble or they can't resist you. It's really the strangest thing if you haven't had it done on you. When they get to an organ that's weak or something you're allergic to, you've got nothing. It's a strange feeling. And so a strong test where your arm really locks in is interpreted as that organ being strong, or as a yes. So you could ask a question and get a yes or no answer. And a weak would be a no, or a poorly functioning organ. When patients are lying prone, we can use the hamstrings, kind of an easily accessible muscle. And so there are a couple hypotheses about how muscle testing works. The short answer is we don't know exactly the mechanism. But a couple proposed ideas. One is that if the organ is not functioning well, it can affect the skin directly above that organ. And so then by touching that skin, touching that organ point, and muscle testing, you get a sensory motor reflex from touching the skin that can inhibit the muscle. That's one hypothesis. And that works in TBM. A lot of the organ points, they're derived from acupuncture, trigger points in massage, and different neurovascular reflexes. And a lot of those points tend to be kind of over where the organ is. You're touching the stomach point, it's kind of on the upper left, and liver point is over on the right. And so this hypothesis could work. But then in TBM, there are also points to test different metabolic functions, like how well you can assimilate protein, or how well you're regulating your blood sugar. And so this hypothesis of the organ affecting the skin above it, that doesn't really explain a metabolic point. So another hypothesis is that if we picture meridians and chi, or wiring and electrical energy, that we could have some kind of static in the system, or a sort of bioimpedance, and that if you have an organ that's not functioning well, it increases the impedance in the system, and that can get to a level where it's enough that it inhibits the muscle activity. So that's another hypothesis. So in TBM, Module 1, we learn the basic physiologic exam. So they give you a nice prepackaged checklist, like go through this with every new patient. Whereas in my experience with applied kinesiology, it can be like such a massive amount of information, you don't really know where to start. So in TBM, you start with assessing their sugar and protein metabolism, and then their water metabolism and utilization. And so those are the backbones of your cell being able to do its biochemical functioning. Do you regulate your blood sugar? Can you absorb water? Can you get it into the cell? Can you absorb protein? Can you get it into the cell? And so those are the first tests that you do in a TBM assessment. And then they have a whole bunch of other ones going through all the major organs, assessing vision, assessing immune organs like the thymus. There's a whole list. And it is a bit of memorization when you go to the conference, and going back through and memorizing which spot is for which organ and what the correction is. But once you get the memorization down, you should be able to go through this flow in 30 to 45 minutes. And as you're going through and testing a patient, so you touch the stomach point, you test. You touch the liver point, you test, so on and so forth. When you find one that tests weak, where their arm kind of does this wobble, then you would immediately just do the correction for that organ, whatever spinal levels. So liver would be T2, T5, T8. Massage at T2, massage at T5, massage at T8, and then retest. And the liver should now test strong where it tested weak before. So in that 30 to 45 minute course, not only do you assess all their functions, you do the treatment as well. So it's really rather efficient in terms of time at an appointment. And then at the end of the exam, you do what's called needs and use. And I think this is really the biggest takeaway that I got from TBM. So in needs and use, there are body points that correspond to certain vitamins and minerals. So the calcium point above the clavicle, you can touch that point and muscle test on the person. And if they're deficient in calcium, they'll go weak. So then well, maybe I want to supplement. So you grab your calcium supplement that you're thinking of giving them. Before you give it to them, you want to make sure that they're not reactive to it. Maybe they're allergic to the capsule, maybe they're allergic to the filler, maybe they're reactive to calcium for some reason. You want to make sure that they're not going to have a reaction. So you have them hold this supplement and then muscle test. And if they're reactive or allergic, they'll test weak because that supplement's increasing the bioimpedance in the system. So you test, make sure they're not allergic. Say they test strong, that means they're fine if they're not allergic. So then you want to find out how much calcium do they need. That's kind of asking how deep is the hole that they've dug for their deficiency. And you can ask this question verbally. Does this body need 1 tablet per day? Muscle test. If you get a strong, that's a yes. If you get a weak, that's a no. So it allows you to ask a yes-no question. Does this body need 2 tablets? And you keep going up until you find a yes. Say they need 3. Okay, now you know how deep your hole is. Now you want to assess how much can they actually use at one time. Because maybe if you give them 3 tablets at a time, their body can only absorb and use 1, and then it's just kind of expensive urine. So you go through and ask, can this body use 3? They go weak, that means no, they can't actually use 3. Can this body use 2? They go strong, that means yes. Okay, they can use 2. So you would send them home telling them to take 2 calcium tablets a day. So it really gives you a way to personalize your supplement protocols for what each patient's body needs and can use at that time, and to decide maybe between different brands of supplements. Like I went to New Seasons and like muscle tested the different brands on myself, and there were a couple that I was like, oh yeah, my body likes those, and another one that was like the same thing but a different brand, and I was like, whoop, nope, don't like that. Okay, I'm not going to buy that brand. And so it allows you to check that on a patient. And you don't even have to have a body point that corresponds to the supplement. If there's not a body point, you just have them hold the supplement and see whether it strengthens them and can test how much you need and use. And I think we could apply this not only to supplements, but maybe even like to homeopathics or flower essences or herbal remedies. Anything that you're thinking of giving, you could test. You know, are they reactive to it? Do they need it? What dose do they need? What dose can they use? As a way to double check your prescription that you're thinking of. Some of the most common supplements that they recommended were calcium, vitamin D, vitamin B6, trace minerals, vitamin E, essential fatty acids, vitamin C, acidophilus, and antioxidants. They also did a lot with hydrochloric stomach acid supplements to help patients better digest their protein. And they would do that just like after the first bite of a meal. Take the supplement, and it's kind of like a Pavlov's dogs, like you're retraining your stomach. When you get food, make hydrochloric acid. So the idea is you take that supplement just for a few weeks to like retrain your stomach what it's supposed to be doing. But again, with all of these, it's not like you see a patient and you just send them home with all of them. You do the needs and use and see, does their body actually need these? Are they deficient? Can they use them? So when I went through, we practiced on each other. I ended up with the hydrochloric stomach acid supplements and a vitamin D and an acidophilus, but none of the other ones came up for me. So that saved me, $300 of supplements and like a giant pill box. The last component, so once you've gone through the basic physiologic exam, then you want them to start what's called the autonomic recovery program. Basically diet and lifestyle recommendations. The first component is hydration. They recommended 2/3 of an ounce of water per pound of body weight, which works out to be quite a bit of water, probably more than most of your patients are drinking. And they really emphasize pure water, not mineral water, not vitamin water, not soda, not coffee, not tea, not juice, just water. And then adhering to a circadian rhythm, trying to really have that sleep-wake cycle at the same time each day, even on the weekend. Trying to eat your meals at about the same time. Because a lot of our hormones, we have a cyclical release of different hormones. And so if we don't have a rhythm, that's going to interrupt our hormonal cycles. Exercise, working up to an hour per day, depending on where your patient's starting at a level that is reasonable for them. And then there's a big piece with diet. So when you test their blood sugar regulation, if their blood sugar regulation tested weak and you had to do the correction, then they need to do a pretty stringent diet for 2 to 3 weeks to kind of give their blood sugar a rest, so to speak, while it heals up. And so the diet's really low glycemic. Meat, dairy, eggs are all fine. Most vegetables are fine. Not a lot of grains. Not a lot of dried fruit, no sweeteners. Fresh fruit is fine. I started doing it when I was at the program because they tested my blood sugar. It was wrong in all the ways that it could be wrong. They corrected it. I felt like 10 million times better, so I decided to do their diet. It's pretty stringent, but I think the average patient could adhere to it if they're really dedicated to the idea. And then after 2 to 3 weeks, you want to do a challenge meal with all the pasta that they want and the dessert that they didn't have. And then you check them the next day and see, did the switch and the circuit breaker stay on, or did it flip back off? So you're waiting to give their blood sugar enough of a rest that then it can handle a high carb meal. Because ultimately we don't want to pigeonhole them into like never being able to eat carbs. That's a temporary thing. In the long run, we want them to be able to eat whatever they want in moderation. And ultimately, the sort of diet that they would recommend is something kind of like Sally Fallon, Weston A. Price Foundation, if you guys are familiar with them. Emphasis on whole grains, soaking your grains in beans to help decrease the phytates and anti-nutrients, fermenting things like sourdough and kimchi and all that good stuff. And then they really emphasize getting some animal protein from whatever your ancestral source would be. For most of us, that's beef or lamb or fish. Doesn't have to be a lot, like half a pound a week, but they seem to think that that is really important. I don't know all the details of why they think it's important. They didn't do a great job of explaining that part, to be honest. And then also as part of the autonomic recovery protocol, they talk about reducing stress. This is just like all the details of that blood sugar stabilization diet. If you want to read it, you can. I put it in there so you would have it. I understand you can't read it from here, and I don't need to talk through the whole thing. So the standard appointment process, say you're a new patient, what do you expect? The first appointment, they're going to run through the basic physiologic exam, 30 to 45 minutes, touching all the points, muscle testing, doing any corrections that are needed, massaging on your back. And then you're going to start the autonomic recovery protocol as soon as you go home that day to help those treatments hold. Within the first couple weeks, you see your patients maybe 3 times a week for the first couple weeks. It's really pretty intensive, turning around whatever process they have going and getting momentum moving back in the right direction. And really supporting your patient as they're making like a lifestyle overhaul. And so at the second appointment, you're going to go through that whole physiologic exam again. You're rechecking every single switch in your circuit breaker and seeing, did it hold? You turned it back on last time. Is it still on, or did it turn back off? And then on subsequent appointments, if that organ has tested strong 2 times in a row, you don't need to keep testing it every time. You just test their problem spots. And you always test the blood sugar and the water, since that's like the foundation of everything. And once their physiologic exam is holding strong, then you can move into some of what you learn in the second module with the emotions, learning, mental abilities, immune system, allergies, kind of going deeper into details. And my understanding was that most people, it would be maybe like a 6-month to a year-long process, depending on what pathology they were coming in with. But it's only that first couple weeks that it's 3 times a week. After that, you decrease frequency to where you're seeing your doctor maybe every other week or once a month. And then you go in for the occasional tune-up. Like maybe after Thanksgiving, you're like, whoa, my blood sugar's out. I ate too much pie. Come help me. So these are some resources if you want to learn more. They have a website. It includes some newsletters and free resources and handouts. They also have a locate a practitioner function if you are interested in experiencing it or you have anyone that you want to refer for that sort of thing. And then they have another conference, the Module 2, where they go over the emotional exam, the mental exam, allergies, immune function, learning, structural exams. And that will be April 14th to 15th. It was just like out by the airport at the Shiloh Inn Suites. And I thought it was a really well done conference. You get a lot of time to workshop and practice on each other. I would highly recommend it, and I know registration is still open. And you do not have to have taken Module 1 to take Module 2. You can take them in whatever order you desire. So you could totally jump in if you want to. Okay, does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Did they ever, like say for like the calcium deficiency,
Would
they ever follow up with the lab to confirm their suspicion?
So The sense that I got at the conference was that TBM is kind of like a trademark thing, and they're really into it being the one and only modality that you would use, and do it their way or the highway. And I don't know that that's the way that I want to incorporate it into my practice, so I totally think that you could follow up with a lab value, and I think that would be really interesting to do and something that I would want to do in my practice.
Yeah, I would want to see this a few times.
Yeah, I want to use myself as a guinea pig because I had my blood glucose done right before I went to the conference, and it was low for average, and it has been the last 3 times I've had it done. So now I want to go back in after I get it to where it tests well according to TBM and see if it's changed, just as a sample size of 1 study.
I was wondering about testing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
As you mentioned, you've done that in the store, and I was kind of confused if you're just using your own strength.
Yeah, so there are a couple ways to muscle test yourself. Some people do they have their finger and are trying to pull it apart. Other people I like to do are you kind of stand and you'll lean forward if it's a yes, and you'll kind of feel magnetically repelled backwards if it's a no. It's a very odd feeling, but you can calibrate your patient. So when I'm working with a new patient, I would have their arm out and I would just think in my head yes and push on their arm, and that would give me what strong feels like for them. And in my head I would think no, and I'd push on their arm, and that would be their weak. And so I can calibrate for myself. I'll be yes, and kind of lean, I lean forward and be no, and I can feel my weight shift back. So if you want to play around with muscle testing yourself, you can just think yes, or say no to calibrate. What does strong feel like? What does weak feel like? It definitely takes a little bit of playing around with to fine tune and get a sense of. And some people are easier to test than others. Some people give really clear strong and weak, and some people the difference is not as perceptible. It seems to depend. People that are doing more different things, they're taking all these herbs and supplements, and they're wearing the crystals, and they're doing that, you don't get super clear responses because it's their system has too many things going on. People that are relatively healthy and not doing a whole lot of treatments, you tend to get clearer responses from them. Any other questions? Yeah.
So it sounds like the patient doesn't really know what you're testing when you're testing it, or you don't really tell them anything about this.
No, so when you're touching the organ points, they don't really know what you're testing. And I think that's ideal because you can have a patient that kind of if you're going weak, you can sort of fight it. So if I know that you're testing my liver and I really, 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 really want my liver to be working because I've had liver problems, I can kind of change the test result by sheer willpower to fight you and make it an unclear answer. Because then you're wait, are they going weak or are they not going weak? I'm not sure. And so I think it's better when the patient isn't emotionally invested in what you're testing.
When you were talking about dosage, do you just kind of think those thoughts when you're to get the yes or no?
Yeah, so you could say it out loud or you could think it. On my I call it the voodoo spectrum of how out there certain things seem. To me, being able to think it and have there be a response, I have seen it work so many times that I believe it, but it seems a little crazy. I'll just be honest. I'm not sure how this is working. I guess if you view it more from the energetic medicine perspective and your healing intention, it kind of makes sense. But the science chemistry part of me is whoa, what are we doing here?
Maybe if the people who are around on the crystal and eating everything well, and we don't have that great of a response because it's just the living animals.
Maybe.
Okay. That's good. Yeah,
Well, and I know patients can. At the conference, a couple people went into the equivalent of a healing crisis, kind of where it's you've had enough corrections and your body's whoa, we're done. And when it's done, you kind of stop getting clear answers. It's everything just goes weak. And so you can't have a patient where you're not getting clear answers because their body's just maxed out, they're done. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.